Ma, can I have these?
Your dinner be ready soon, love.
But please, I'm starving.
Just say yes, Julie. It's been a long week. What else has he had today?
Come on, just one.
There you go, son.
Please, I want
Here
them.
you are, pet.
Please.
Saying no will only make you the bad guy. No. If you're hungry, you can have cheese and crackers or fruit.
Let's go easy on the treats. Start with smaller ones less often to keep your family healthy.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this evening's webinar. My name is Jen Hogan, and I'm delighted to be your host for this event. This webinar is brought to you by the START campaign, a public health awareness campaign from SafeFood, the HSE and Healthy Ireland, and the Public Health Agency and Department of Health in Northern Ireland. The campaign has been designed to help parents and guardians start their kids on a way to a healthier life by providing practical advice and useful resources. These include parenting expert videos, healthy snack options, and steps to get started. And you can find them by searching Make a Start. This evening, we're focusing on the topic of how best to moderate our children's treat food consumption. Research with parents and guardians for the START campaign revealed that while they want to reduce treats like crisps, chocolate and biscuits for children, saying no is difficult, and there's very few parents who don't struggle with the amount of treats that they give to their children. Sometimes it just seems easier and faster when life is busy, but most of us would like to make healthier choices for our children and encourage them to make healthy choices too, while striking a balance, of course, and making sure that food doesn't become an issue or a battleground, and who doesn't need help in getting that balance right. As a mum of 7 children, I'm certainly interested in hearing our panel's expert advice. And this webinar is all about supporting you, parents and guardians who've joined us this evening. So if you have any questions for our panel, please submit these into the question and answer section, and I'll put them to our guests a little later on. Before I introduce you to the panel, we want to hear from you. And we have a couple of questions appearing on our screen now asking how often your children have treats in the week. So that's foods such as crisps, chocolates, sweets, biscuits, or sugary drinks. Is it every day? 5 to 6 days a week, 3 to 4 days a week, or once or twice a week? And how confident are you to start the conversation of moderating treats with your kids? Very confident, quite confident, slightly confident, or not at all confident? So while you're voting, I'll introduce you to our panel. I am joined this evening by SafeFood's Chief Specialist in Nutrition, Joana Silva, Child and Adolescent Psychotherapist Colman Noctor, and HSE Clinical Lead on Obesity, Donal O'Shea. So have we any results here in anything that we can have a look at?
It's more of a spread than I thought, to be honest. I was thinking it would be more heavily up to the 5 or 6 days, or even every 7 days, because honestly, in the discussions we were having before, we've all struggled keeping it below 8 days a week for treats, that's the challenge. It's a massive challenge. So that's good. There's a lot of parents on here who are doing really well, actually. And then there's more that are looking for, hopefully, some of the tips that will come out of this evening.
And Joanna, what are the actual guidelines? Because I think that's part of the confusion. Parents don't actually know.
We can touch what we have been doing, and we have some data that says that about 1/5 of the calories that children are consuming comes from this type of food. And we know that in about 1 out of 4 meals, we are including a treat food or a sugary drink. Now, this data was pre-COVID data, and we spoke to parents recently that told us that this actually increased during the pandemic. So when we talk about treat foods, the guidance is really for the smallies to have a small, tiny treat once a week, and for the older child up to twice a week. You're talking about a square of chocolate. You're talking about 5 crisps for the smaller child, and the fun-sized packs of chocolate and biscuits or crisps for the older child. So it's encouraging to see that some of the parents are doing really well, and it's encouraging to see that some of us want to improve on this.
I am shocked. I have to be honest. I am shocked at how little makes up a treat. I think that is something that's going to surprise a lot of people, because I wouldn't consider a square of chocolate a treat. I think that's something, I suppose, that we're going to have to get our head around. And I suppose we associate eating treats so much with obesity, and that's obviously your area there, Donal. And kind of what sort of levels of what levels of increase are we seeing in terms of overweight children and obese children?
Yeah, no, I mean, what's happening is encouraging in a way, in that the levels have stopped going up. And we're now looking at levels of, unfortunately, it's 1 in 4 of our children are either overweight or obese. And that is way too high. If you were to go back 30 years ago, that level would have been maybe 6%. So children living with overweight or obesity has gone up about 4-fold in the last 25 years. And it's a combination of the types of food and nutrition that they're eating, and what's happened, physical activity and our sedentary lifestyles. And it's that perfect storm of a combination that has led to that increase. And that's why you have to change a number of things. Simply focusing on the energy in is not going to address the problem. You have to work across our physical activity infrastructure as well.
Do you think, though, I mean, when you're talking about, that's a scary number, 1 in 4. Do you think parents are recognising this? Because, you know, we're looking at our kids every day. You know, sometimes when you see somebody after you haven't seen them for a little while, and you notice if they have lost weight or gained weight, is it perhaps that parents are oblivious to this?
We know that as parents we don't recognise a weight problem in our children. And that's why it's really important, the changes that are coming in now in, say, GP contracts, so that when both as adults or children you go to your GP, it will be routine to be weighed and measured. And then you'll get the feedback. And if you get that feedback when you're just overweight, whether you're an adult or a child, it's much easier as the adult to make changes yourself. Or if you're if your child has overweight, if you're told that, you won't be thinking that. But the fact that you're told will mean you can introduce changes at home that might just improve the nutrition side of things, and you can come to some decisions about being physically active. So identifying it as an issue is a real challenge, but is beginning to be addressed now with work that's been done with primary care and the GPs.
And I know, I mean, it's not just obviously about appearance. It's not just about how somebody looks if they're, you know, if they're overweight. What are the actual health consequences of a child being overweight?
Yeah, no, I mean, if it was a purely cosmetic thing, it wouldn't be an issue for the health service. It's really important that children do not have issues around shape or feeling that one look is the look. And, you know, we were talking about Snapchat earlier on and TikTok, and the looks that are put out there as being desirable are broadly unobtainable unless you are obsessive around your behaviour, both on the nutrition side and the physical activity side. So we need to move away from that kind of obsession with image, have a positive attitude to the fact that people come in all shapes and sizes. You wind the clock back 200 years, there was always a spectrum of weight, from underweight through overweight through to people living with obesity. It was just a tiny percentage at the living with obesity end. And now that has come back into childhood, unfortunately, and when it just wasn't an issue. And that's why we have to address it as a society. But the health benefits of being a healthy weight, and if you can reach the age of 18 at a healthy weight, then your lifelong weight trajectory is so positive. Whereas if you carry overweight or obesity into early adulthood, the challenge to achieve or maintain a healthier weight is so much more difficult.
But I suppose you've just mentioned Snapchat there and some of the other social media platforms, and we're always talking, particularly as kids get older and they become more aware around these things. How do we get this balance right? So how do we, being aware of the implications for children if they're obese or overweight at a younger age, how do we bring this into a family discussion in terms of making sure somebody doesn't become obsessed with weight, and we maybe displace one problem with another one. Colman, I suppose I'm looking to you here. How do we get this balance right?
Yeah, we have to be really careful around the narrative around food, and it should be about health and not weight. Yeah. It should not be about good and bad foods. It's about good and bad amounts of food. And like I work with young people with eating disorders on oftentimes the opposite side of the spectrum, more restrictive types, and it can be triggered by a class in school that talks about bad fats or something, and a child becomes obsessive about it, or a comment from peers, or the parental behaviour of strict dieting at home, or how we all speak about our body and shape. All of these things, they create a relationship with food, weight and shape. And a childhood lasts a lifetime. And so what Donal's saying about, if you can achieve a healthy relationship up until the 18 years, the prognosis of you keeping that is really positive. But if you have an unhealthy relationship with food, weight and shape in childhood, it's really hard to get over that. And so when we're talking about how do we introduce a child to healthier eating, I think it is about moderation. I think it's not about extremes. I think it's not about kind of fads or excessiveness. And I think absolutely it's not just about food either. I think that energy out point that Donal made again, it's about activity. It's about having the right balance. Yeah. And so although the treat conversation is hugely important, it's but one of the components to how I think we're supposed to be, or how we should formulate health in that way. Would you agree, Donal? Or?
I would agree. I'd agree fully with that. And when I was coming up here this evening, I was thinking, what's one of the key things I'd like to get across, and it's just how difficult it is for parents. That the single thing that I would like to get across is, it is. I'm not going to say it's an impossible ask, because we can't say that. It's just a really difficult ask around the physical activity environment, around the promotion of the high fat, high salt, high sugar foods, not just in the shops, but through Snapchat and TikTok. The prompts come up, and that's all you need is that trigger, and you say, oh yeah, maybe I am, and maybe I will go and have that McDonald's or Burger King, or maybe I will have, when it's promoting Oreos are all over Snapchat. So if parents know that it's really difficult, I hope that will allow that conversation to happen at home about, let's be a little more moderate, let's acknowledge the fact that it's really difficult, and see where we can make some changes.
I know often from talking to you in the past, Colman, about different things. You mentioned nagging doesn't work. So I suppose particularly if you're going near teenagers maybe who have that access to pocket money, or to, I don't know if they have a job themselves, and they have that freedom to go to the shops and make these choices. We're not always there policing every single thing. So is it a case really that we actually need to involve them and engage them in the conversation? It's not about dictating to them, you can't have this or you mustn't have that, but maybe perhaps about making them more aware of the choices they're making.
Yeah, I think it's a real challenge to get balance right in that regard, because again, nagging doesn't work, and encouragement probably works better. But the task of childhood is regulation. So from the point of view of when you say no to your 3-year-old in Tesco's for buttons and they have a tantrum on the floor, you hope by the time they're 19 they don't do that anymore, because they've learned to regulate emotion and all that sort of stuff. But you have to regulate for them when they can't do it. So things like portion control, things like, managing that. Yeah. A child is not going to be able to say, like if a child finishes a bowl of ice cream, they're going to ask you one thing, which is, can I have some more? And as a parent, you say, no, you've had enough, or you think, you're going to get sick if you eat any more, so you're not going to give you any more. And we're teaching them about portion control. So there is an onus on us as parents, as the adults in the room, to say, this is what's okay and this is not. But following on from Donal's point about how difficult it is, and the marketing around it is very psychologically good. And this is not a new thing. I mean, back in the days, I remember going into Superquinn, when you go in, the smell of the bread, that beautiful bread that you'd get, and you'd buy tons of bread, and you'd have a trolley. It'd be hard as the hob of hell the next day, but you'd have bought loads of it because of the smell. You go into Lidl or Aldi, it's the sweet aisles you hit first, and then on your last aisle, it's the Daz and the toilet roll and the stuff that you don't need. You know, so you should never shop hungry, as they say. You know, from that point of view. So that kind of psychological manipulation is everywhere, and it's really difficult to be immune to the triggers, or to, you know, to not fall for that trick. And children are being promoted to create pester power, to create, you know, the nagging, and so gets more, and they have no problems with treats, and you're comparing parent to parent, and so it is really, really difficult in today's climate, especially where we have so much of the temptation in our wake to actually keep discipline. But as the adult in the room, we sometimes have to give our children what they need, not what they want. And that can be very difficult. But I think the year that has been in it has been a real component in this. And I remember saying to my sister last year, you know, what are you giving up for Lent? And she said, absolutely nothing. Food is all I have left, you know. And there was so much that we had given up. And so things that we would have rewarded children for, or saying, like, you'll go to the cinema, or we'll go to the play barn, or, you know, we'll do this or we'll do that. It just became the default position was the treat press, you know. And so I do think however difficult it was in February 2020, it's quite a bit more difficult now.
And it's not just about treats. And I think we are here under the START campaign, and we're talking about treats today. But what START, now I'm a bit biased, but what START does well is to talk about different health behaviors in a very positive way. And that acknowledging that it's very difficult for all of us. We often say that START is a campaign from parents for parents, and that's not just a tagline. We actually talk to parents in different communities, and we try to understand what the challenges are and what they are ready to take on and to change, because the last year was very difficult for everyone, but I think we are now in a better place, and it's encouraging to see parents willing and wanting to change and to try new things. I do think that it's important to involve the child, and that the child has some ownership on that decision, on that plan. And I think it's important that then we lead by example as parents too.
We were having the chats actually there, Joanna, just before we came on, and you mentioned about the things that treats are displacing, and perhaps that's really something that we as parents need to think about, that especially because over the course of the pandemic, like the guys are pointing out, we maybe handed kids treats, we treated ourselves an awful lot more because life was really tough, and you were just taking your little joys where you could get them, but then they obviously became a habit. So
and that's an important point, because it's not just about healthy weight. So first of all, it's about having a healthy relationship with food. And Donal was talking about what tracks into adulthood, and I do feel that a positive relationship with food also tracks into adulthood. So that's important. But it's also about displacing other foods, and that's why sometimes it's important to make those swaps. So is your child genuinely hungry, and do you need to give them something when they finish school and go off to football practice? Because the packet of crisps is not going to give them any calcium or any protein or any vitamins and minerals that they do need for growth and development. So just to keep that in mind sometimes, and to be very realistic too. If your child is looking for a packet of crisps, you're not going to offer them an apple. It's not going to work. So maybe some crackers and some cheese, maybe some popcorn. And I would invite everyone to check our website, because we have very practical, and we all need very practical advice
that is great
to be
advice.
able to change something.
That is.
You know, when you were talking about the promotion to kids, and if you go into the supermarket, the products are placed very cleverly. So for the 3-year-olds, the products are a little lower down. The ones that are designed in both taste and packaging to appeal to a 3-year-old are at the 3-year-old's eye level. 7-year-olds are a little bit taller, so the dairy products and the sweets that are again targeted at that age group, with taste development done so that it's a bliss point for the 7-year-old, because and that's another problem with the kind of treat culture, is that if the child's palate gets habituated to sweet at a young age, and you know, we're designed to like sweet because that's the earliest energy we took on board when we were single cellular organisms. So sweet is good. But if you get used to sweet, you won't diversify, or you'll diversify with great difficulty to the foods that are healthy and full of vitamins and fibre and minerals that we need for good health.
That's very interesting you say that, Donal, because I suppose I've 7, and I thought, I weaned them all the same and introduced them all to the same foods, and yet there are some of them who are their mother's children and have incredibly sweet teeth, and it's kind of hard to, when the apples don't fall that far from the tree, you do feel a certain degree of responsibility. But the other side of it is, and I actually don't know sometimes what's the best thing to do here, so I'm really curious to hear your views on this. If your child won't eat anything and will actually go hungry rather than have a food that isn't quite as good for them, what do you do? Particularly if it's like the school day, and you're trying to make the lunch, and most schools have the healthy eating policies, and they're sending you home advice, and it involves raw vegetables and fruit, and your child doesn't eat an apple unless it's peeled, and they might eat carrots with their dinner, but they're certainly not eating them cold. And you're just thinking, if I put a Cocoa Pop bar in there, they might eat that at least, and they'll have something to sustain them. What's the right thing to do? Do we dig the heels in, or do we go, something is better than nothing?
I think you need to use judgment, and are you, first of all, are you really worried about your child not getting any nutrition? Yeah. And if you do, and if you have worries in relation to a child being underweight, you should definitely go and talk to your healthcare professional, because there may be something there that needs to be explored further. You need to expose them to food, literally, not just taste. They need to, from a very early age, they should be able to touch, to smell, involve them. Now, it's easier said than done. If you're busy at home trying to raise 2-3 children, you're not going to try and get them to chop vegetables with you or to see how you do it. It's difficult, but it's the way to go, to expose them to foods, to give them time. It may take between 10 to 15 times for a child to get used to a flavor, and also to acknowledge that there are foods that they don't like. I don't eat strawberries, never did.
And that's okay.
I don't eat strawberries. Once they are not restricting a group of food completely, that's fine. Now, if your child doesn't eat fruit and vegetables, no. But if the child doesn't eat strawberries and broccoli and they are fine with everything else, I wouldn't have major concerns. And they are entitled not to like one food or two.
So do you then encourage your child?
Insist.
Do you remember?
Now, keep calm, no pressure, don't fight over food. You don't want them to in any way to develop an unhealthy relationship with food. But keep calm and find things that they like. They definitely don't want the peppers or the apple, but they are happy to bring a pear or a banana. So talk to them, see what they want, what they like. Start small, and use other strategies like mixing those foods, if you're talking about vegetables, with foods that they actually like in a sandwich, for example. So it needs a bit of thought. But
and there is, to build on that, there is a question. It's kind of come in there that a 4-year-old who eats only bread, drinks milk, and eats watermelon or strawberries, that's great.
From Trish,
trust the child. Let them and try and add things. They want sweets, and you're at your wit's end. So you have to limit the sweets. But if a child is working off the food pyramid, all the good shelves, and that top shelf is little, you keep that little, then you can trust the child's hunger, you can trust the child's sense of fullness and satiety, and then gradually try to broaden out.
And I think that's a very important conversation. We're talking about treats and moderating them, and sometimes we touch on limiting, and I think we also need to focus on adding, because there are plenty of foods that we can very slowly add to our children's diets, and they will see the benefit of that.
If you do have a child like Trish there, her child has obviously what appears to be quite a restricted diet, and there's some healthy options in there, is that okay? Is it okay to accept that your child
it's okay to
only
accept that and
very limited
to build
types
from
of
there?
food?
I would definitely encourage parents then to introduce and maybe try to go with foods that would have a similar consistency and flavor at first. But definitely you need to encourage variety there.
You want to come in on that, Colman?
we sometimes are not introduced to different foods.
Yeah.
You know, so we facilitate
Yep.
the fussy eater in some respects. And you know, I wouldn't be encouraging anyone to have 6 pots on the go with 6 different dinners for 6 different children's needs or wants. But we can build things in, but we have to be encouraging children to take on the choice of taste. So oftentimes children go, I don't like that. You've never tried it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So reward the effort, not the outcome. Reward them for trying the new thing, whether they like it or not. You know, and but their palate will increase. There's very few children like starving in that sense, you know what I mean? And I've seen my own kids, and they, you know, would find a heel of bread and they'll be chewing away on that, you know, to, you know, on in between if they didn't like the dinner that was on or whatever. But the case is about broadening the range on, but again, not forcing and not making a big issue of it. Less is more when it comes to mealtime battles for me. I just think if we have this huge tension around it, it becomes a point of visibility. This is how I get attention in the family, is just by saying I don't eat that, and then the big furore that follows oftentimes won't end up in them eating it, but it will end up in a big row. And smaller children especially, they're very irrational beings, you know, from the point of view they can't find their shoes, but they can find that sliver of onion in the bolognese that you tried to sieve out. And so from the point of view of, it isn't about, again, what they want, but more about what they need.
What they need.
Do you think, I suppose, we all know those kids, you know, when you go, you have a birthday party or you have an occasion and there's some parent who you think has it sussed on the old diet thing, you don't see their child, you know, inhaling chocolate on a daily basis, but then they go to a party and then you have a totally different situation. Is restriction, does it perhaps make foods more attractive? Do you have this whole idea that you will see the child who's never allowed to ordinarily have treats, or certainly has them on a very restricted basis, go crazy then when there's a free-for-all and there's sweets in front of them and there are, you know, I suppose the party, and the nature of parties, you can go and help yourself generally. Is that something, is that just coincidence, or is there something about it?
I'll leave the bit around what the child feels with
The
the restriction to
psychology of it.
Colman, but I do think we need to acknowledge that we celebrate with food, we celebrate with treats. We start Christmas the week after Halloween, we bring it until mid-January, and then we already have chocolate eggs or Easter eggs on the shelf. So we are exposed to this availability of treat foods. They are also very affordable, so it's very difficult for parents to navigate that, and for the child, because as Donal was saying, the child knows exactly what they are. My children, we brought them to Frankfurt many years ago, and they wanted to visit the Haribo factory. I didn't even know that Haribo were based in Germany. They did, and they were small. So I do think that's very tricky, and birthday parties and celebrations definitely don't make things easier for parents. I would never suggest that restricting a certain type of food is the way to go. And Colman, it would definitely impact on the child's relationship with food then.
Yeah, prohibition doesn't work. It either demonizes something to the extreme, or it specializes something into something that it's not. So I mean, again, getting off the good bad food narrative, but good and bad amounts of food would be where I would suggest. And again, that kid who gets to the party, who gets, you know, their hands on something that they've, you know, not had for months, of course you're going to kind of overindulge in that moment, you know what I mean? But again, I just think moderation and middle of the ground all the time, rather than any sort of extreme conversations around food. I think extreme conversations creates extreme relationships with food, weight and shape.
And I think for parents it's important to acknowledge that we make a plan and we try our best, and I'm sure we all did it here. And then sometimes life gets on the way and we don't do as well the following week. And it's actually fine to have that conversation again, and to restart, to reset the clock, and to try again.
And do you think, you know, I suppose we're talking about labels on food, what's a good food, what's a bad food, what's an okay food. Do you think that's kind of healthy, or that it's a good way to go? Is this the sort of thing that we should be encouraging our children to be aware of? I suppose, Donal, really, for you to see certain foods labelled as good or bad, is that helpful maybe in the whole fight against obesity?
I don't think so. I think it's important to know what you're eating. I think it's important in the environment we live in that, you know, if you're having a cappuccino and a muffin, that you know that that's probably 550 calories and maybe close to half your total daily energy requirement, and you're just sitting down for an 11 o'clock snack. So I think things like calorie posting on menu boards are good for adults, and that educates us, and then we can transfer that to the kids when we're choosing for your younger kids. Food labelling is very important. In general, anything that has been vehemently opposed by the food industry is highly likely to work. So food labelling has been opposed, clear food labelling. The traffic light system that goes red for high in all the things that, amber and green for foods that are clearly mineral rich and fibre filled. That's what consumers have asked for, and it's vehemently opposed by the food and drinks industry as oversimplistic. Good food, bad food is not the concept we want to bring into the home or into the kitchen, and a focus on weight, shape and health. Is that the term you used? I like those three together. It's about, we want health to be in there all the time. And part of one of the start campaigns involved, portraying the parent as a hero. And for me, that's what the parent has to feel. The parent has to feel good about moderating the crap that the kids are getting. And the kids' job is to get as much of that as they can. And so I was just interested, at what age do you involve a child in that conversation in the family? Because there's no point in talking to the 3-year-old at all. So what age is, I know it's a little different for every child, but...
I think you drip feed the knowledge according to their development. So as they get a little bit older, you're able to kind of decide a little bit for them. Like regulation, the core aspect of being a parent is to become redundant. So what you want is for them to not need you anymore. So you should be stepping back and allowing them more control over their own choices. But it's oftentimes best done when they show you, it's not a human right to have a treat, but it's a responsibility to be able to open the treat press and go at it for yourself. Do you know what I mean? So you don't get the right before you show the responsibility. You show the responsibility first, and then you earn the right. Does that make sense? And so from the point of view of, it's about trial and error and about children, give them choices, and they will fail. They will make bad choices. They'll eat too much. They'll indulge too much. But then they don't get the choice the next time until they start making smarter choices. So I always use the example of, if you want your child in at 8 o'clock over the summer and they want to come in at 10, say to them, come in at 8 o'clock, 3 nights in a row, no arguments, no rows, and on time, and we push it to 8:15. At 8:15, you come in 3 times in a row, on time, no arguments, we go to 8:30. So you earn the right for more choice, rather than it's when we open the floodgates early and then try and close them. That's when the problem is. So when you're turning around to a 15-year-old and saying, I know I've never limited treats, but we're going to start now. I mean, that can be a real challenge. So it is going to start as you mean to go on, but encourage them to self-regulate, but only at a level where they can. And I think 3-year-olds can't do it, 8-year-olds can't do it. You're talking about 13 starting.
Can you actually predict when a child can? I suppose that's a hard one, isn't it? It really depends on how interested they are in the whole nutrition side of things and the benefits for them.
I don't think they get that till teenage years, and again, you've the tight grip on the treat press early and then loosening it very slowly. But I think really at the point of knowing health, weight, they're concepts that are kind of complex. I would think.
And the
14
about the 13, 14 is that's also mid-puberty. And puberty is hormones gone mad. Therefore, your taste and kind of cravings vary with that. And the other thing, parents become particularly, I'm going to say the enemy, when hormones kick in. And that's a natural thing. Hormones kick in, you've reached that stage in your life where in the, as we talked about, kind of evolutionary terms, your job is to push out of the nest and go off and make your own life. So you're meant to do that to the parents, push them away at the very time that the parents are saying, now is the time to have a conversation about moderating treats. So, you know, the hero bit, I think, is great, because I think you have to navigate it within your own family. You have to look at your kids and go, well, you know, where are we getting it right? Where are we getting it, you know, where could we do it differently? And I do think access is one thing. I mean, and it applies to anything addictive, cigarettes, alcohol, and high salt, high fat, high sugar food hits the same part of the brain that cigarettes hit, that alcohol hits. So if it's in, it will be consumed. And you have to have it, in, but it has to be in, I suppose, in quantities that are manageable. And when they're gone, they're gone.
That's exactly the sentence I was thinking, because that's what my mother used to say when we were growing up. I can't wait till they're gone, if there was a box of USA biscuits, because they weren't replenished. You know, once they were done, they were done. On Thursday night, there was treats bought on the Thursday night shop. But they were never, if they were gone by Friday, they were never refilled till the following Thursday. Do you know what I mean? And so that encourages you to self-regulate. Do you know what I mean? Because if you want something on Monday, you make it last.
If you even notice, if you go to the supermarket or to your local shop or wherever and you're buying treats, it's often cheaper to buy the bigger treats than to buy the smaller snack size treats. So you have, if you're on a budget and you're trying to buy treats to go around a few different people, you're nearly encouraged to buy the larger treat. You're still only counting it as one treat, when it's obviously a much larger portion than what the snack size treat would be. And it's so easy to fall into that habit, really, isn't it? It's so easy. But just to go back to the labels again, and the good food and the bad food, and again, I suppose, Colman, can come back to you again on this, because it is so important when we're trying to make sure children and teenagers have a healthy relationship with food. If you label food as a good food or a bad food and you're trying to educate your child, and again, I do understand the whole need to teach them to self-regulate, but is there not a danger then that you have kids feeling guilty about food, or you're nearly setting them up for feeling they've done something wrong in having a treat instead of it being a treat?
You'll always have the extreme reactions to these things. Where we just said about over the pandemic, we saw a huge amount of increase in treats. We've also seen a huge increase in eating disorders over the pandemic. So we've seen a huge presentation in children who've over-controlled their intake, and, you know, watching these YouTube workout videos 5 and 6 times a day and take it excessively. So it all depends on the person. A watch that counts your steps might be a very useful thing for someone trying to be healthier. Put that in the hands of a very self-conscious 14-year-old girl who's really struggling with self-esteem, and it could be the most dangerous thing you'd ever put on their arms. Do you know what I mean? So all these things have the potential for, but when we go back to the relationship with food, weight and shape, and the good and bad foods, the extremes, and again, I don't know whether you can even trust labels. You can have this kind of water meadow drink, and it looks like it's amazing, but there's 17 bowls of sugar in it. You know, so there's something a bit mistrusting about that. But there was a question just in there I saw about using treat as a reward. So I think it may have been about a school teacher who rewarded children with sweets on a Friday if they did well on a test. I'm not so much against reward. I am against using it as a soother, you know, for distress. So when we have difficulty with food relationships in terms of like binge eating disorder, people will oftentimes turn to food as a means of, because they feel bad, or they feel, you know, that the food will make them feel better, and so or else not eating will make them feel better. So the idea that if I control my weight, I feel that I'm in charge of something. That's where the relationship becomes dangerous, you know, almost in the fact where it becomes a coping strategy to either overeat or undereat. And the issue is that the food is not the problem, but it's becoming a coping strategy for the problem. Do you know what I mean? And so when we're looking at how these relationships form, we like rewarding a child, or if you win something, getting a bag of Haribos and stuff, that's part of life. I don't think that's a desperately bad message. But if a child is, you know, it's almost like saying, you know, if you're sad, there's a liquor cabinet, you know, have at it and it'll make you feel better.
Dinner, I'll give you a treat. To your home. It's when you normalize that rewarding behavior with food.
Yeah, and the food industry have very much used the, treat yourself, you deserve it, over the last kind of 2 or 3 years to normalize the concept and to link treat inextricably to, sweets, chocolates, biscuits. And it's very clever. So I think they have ownership of the term treat. So I'd like a treat now means only one thing. I think so. We mentioned reward. You can't replace a treat, which is a this-minute thing, with a trip to the cinema or a walk or a game of football at the weekend, because they're not the same thing.
It's immediate rewarding.
Yeah. So so it's moderating. It's about. I think it's really about it. People have been aware of that and saying, right, look, it's an uphill battle, but we can try to do better.
Isn't it interesting how the narrative has changed? I think when I was growing up, it was junk food. Now it's treats.
Yeah.
It's even turned into something positive. Do you know what I mean? From the point of view of,
Absolutely right.
I don't remember being called treats when we were growing up. It was junk food. Yeah.
I know we've looked at the whole idea of looking at it beyond just obesity and beyond shape and things like that. But if you have a parent, I suppose, if there's a parent who is aware that one of their children is overweight and they want to do something about it, and they know that treats or junk food has been, I suppose, a significant contributing factor to it, and they know that this is something that they need to change, how do you address that? So I know we've talked about, discussing it as a health benefit and stuff, but if you're very conscious that maybe a more drastic change needs to happen to try and get a child's weight under control, how do you address that without making a child feel really bad or feel they're being punished because the language has changed and it has moved from junk to treat, like you pointed out there? How do we do that?
I think you incentivize health and you sell it and you pitch it as something that is positive, as opposed to this kind of punitive, sanction-based, you're not good enough because you don't control your weight well enough, or you're not disciplined enough, or this is not acceptable. It's almost a concern that you could get a lot more out of your life if you had more energy, if you were able to kind of get some fresh air, to be more active. These are things that will offer you something, do you know what I mean, as opposed to necessarily it being critical.
And we also know that because there's such a strong genetic component to weight gain, that if there is a child with overweight, that it's likely at least one of the parents will have struggled and have overweight or obesity. So that parent saying, I've decided I really need to do something and get healthier, will you help me? And what can we do? And involving the child in helping the parent as a whole family thing is the only way. A focus on the child will, I would say, is highly likely to end not well and not positively.
Hypersensitivity.
Yeah.
But and also the success of something like an exercise regime, if it's done in company, is way more likely than if you're trying to do it solo. Do you know what I mean? If you have someone else who's journeying with you and sort of we'll go for a walk every evening, and maybe for the first, and this is the thing, cultures are always difficult to introduce in the house. So for the first 6 weeks, it will be a battle zone, and people will go, but after 6 weeks, it just becomes what you do. Do you know what I mean? So once you can get past the initial resistance, say you go over for a walk on a Sunday, your teenagers will moan about that for the first 6 or 7 times you do it, but then it'll just be what you do on a Sunday, and it becomes, culture has to be created. It's not something that you can just invent, overnight. And so you have to kind of sit with the disgruntlement in the initial phases for that to become a habit.
And that's something I didn't realize for a long time working in the field of kind of weight management. It's that 6 week kind of 40 days period is almost the magic number to change habit or begin to change a habit or begin to change a culture. So if you know that, then you're prepared for kind of 4 to 6 weeks of uphill failure, and then things should begin to get a little bit I won't say easy, but easier.
Easier, yeah. for sure.
After
You
that.
know that's half the thing, isn't it? Just we just
Because
have
a
to
lot of us will
weather
give up
this
after a
storm.
fortnight, you know, say,
yeah.
oh my God, look, it's a disaster. Whereas if you know you have another 4 weeks to push through, and that as parents, you need to keep taking the lead, and you know, you just may get there.
And that's important, isn't it? Any change you're looking to make, it's to be made as a family. It's not you or she or he, it's us. And I think that's empowering for both the parent and the child.
I'm conscious that we're going to come to some of the viewers' questions now in a second, Joana, but I just wanted to address something. Again, conversations happening just before we went live. Parents not really knowing what treats are, and the amount of foods that we were sitting here feeling a little bit smug, you know, because we gave them a yogurt, and it's yogurt in name, but perhaps not totally healthy for them.
It's still a yogurt,
Yeah.
and Donal touched there on the labels, and it's important. And some yogurts will hit the red sticker for some nutrients. When we talk about treat foods strictly, you're talking about crisps and chocolates and sweets and cakes and ice cream. And then, of course, just with any food, there are different, there are two extremes for each food group, and you can get better quality or not. And we talk about whole grain cereals. We talk about vegetable spreads instead of butter. But I think the focus on treats should be, if you look at the food pyramid, at that top shelf red, that it's quite subtle, but it's actually disconnected from the rest of the pyramid. And that's to translate the message that we don't need them for health. We don't get essential nutrients from them.
Okay, well, before we go to the viewers' questions, can I ask you, all of you, your top tips for broaching this conversation with your children, this whole idea of broaching the need to moderate treats?
I think for me is, first of all, know that you're not alone, and that we all have the same challenges and struggles. I think that's important. Aim for something achievable and acknowledge that it's going to be difficult.
Okay. Colman?
Yeah, I think keep it about health, not about weight. Be patient, because it's not going to be easy to do. And just be aware of maybe how we're being manipulated, I guess, you know, through the marketing things, and kind of be a critical consumer, I think is maybe that's what I'm going to take from tonight anyway, from talking to the guys, Yeah,
I mean, I think I wouldn't really add much to that. I think be aware. I think that to do it within your family, I think the hero tagline is really good. Parents need to become heroes in the face of a food industry that are only thinking about this year's profit and nothing beyond that. Yeah. And the parents are thinking about the next 70 years for their kids and trying to overcome that kind of that power of the food industry. So if they know they're up against it, and then if they have a conversation as us, you know, what way can we change things to make our lives a little healthier? And then that 6 week, don't give up until you've given it a 6 week go. And if at the end of 6 weeks that particular change hasn't worked, look at one other, and one thing at a time, one small change. Don't try 3 things.
Okay.
And Jen, just to say, Donal touched there on the hero. I find that tagline quite empowering too. And someone was asking about grandparents and how to talk. I think it's actually very empowering to say to someone, look, we looked at what we were doing at home. We want to make some changes, and I would really appreciate if you could support us here. So if the kids are going to stay over with you, try to think about something beforehand, but we are trying to manage treats, and we made a plan, and we would like to stick to that as much as possible. I think it's actually okay to talk to other people about it, and you'll actually find out that other people have similar you know, struggles to yours, similar challenges.
Yeah, I don't think your child will ever thank you for being strict on treats. But they certainly won't thank you for not managing it for them either. You know, and as it gets back to Donal's point, if at 18 you have a good relationship, it's a lifelong habit. Whereas if you don't, that's a lifelong habit too. So just because they're not grateful doesn't mean it's not important.
True. I think we'll go to some of the questions now, will we? Because there's loads have come in, absolutely loads. And I can see one there from Sabrina asking, if a child doesn't eat a meal you make, do you give them something else that they will eat? I suppose that's what we were talking about a little bit earlier on, those battles. Do you make them finish their corn? Do you offer them something else, or do you let them go hungry? Do you remember the days where your mother reheated your dinner for your breakfast the next morning if you didn't eat it? Is that what we should be doing, or do you just
don't
give them
make a
something else?
battlefield out of the dining table, for sure. Try your best and see, is there, depending on what you're eating, is there a bit of the meal that the child can eat? Can you negotiate a bit and try to expose them to those foods? Or is there a genuine dislike for something? But I would definitely not put any pressure or no. Don't make it confrontational. It won't lead to anything.
Agreed, lads, yeah.
Be very patient.
Absolutely. And what healthy snacks, from Emma? Emma's asking, what healthy snacks can we give our children? Because
So yeah,
maybe
I would
that's part of the
actually
problem.
ask Emma to check our website or the HSC. The guidelines have a huge suite of resources with ideas. Again, does your child need something very light, a piece of fruit, a yogurt, 2 or 3 crackers, or do you need something a bit more substantial, like half of a bagel with a bit of peanut butter? Does the child need a piece of toast and a bit of cheese and tomato before going to football practice? There's plenty of ideas, so I would definitely go to the Safe Food or the HSE website for those.
Okay, we had another viewer, I can't see the question there, but there was somebody there, just asked there a few minutes ago, in the case of separated parents where mum is very conscious to make sure that the child only has a certain number of treats, but when the child goes to dad, all those rules are out the window. How do you balance that now, Colman? Because that's a different one.
Very carefully is my answer to that. I mean, I think that the triangulation of a separation of child becomes a token of the currency of, you know, good cop, bad cop, and all that sort of stuff. And this would be a symptom of their relationship as opposed to necessarily anything that could be fixed in isolation. So I don't think it's about the treats, but it is about being the favourite, and it's a bit like the grandparents. You know, we don't like saying no to them because they'll be in bad form. You try and explain what you'd like, and try and, you know, explain what you're trying to do. But I think that may go deeper than just a conversation, perhaps. Yeah.
I suppose it's the same, we saw there again about the teacher maybe giving treats at the end. I suppose it's the same sort of thing, isn't it, perhaps with grandparents? It's a treat sometimes. So I know my own parents and stuff as well. You're often cursing what they give. But is that not a privilege of being a grandparent? Is there not a difficulty there? I know you want to keep people on board, but you are also talking to somebody who has raised a family and might feel a bit put out to suggest if you... Yeah, I think
it's grandparents really hard. Can be hypocritical as well, that my parents give my children far more treats than they ever give me, you know, for that point of view. And I don't mind it in the points, like I see them coming home in the car and they've smuggled Jaffa cakes or something up their sleeves that Nana has given them on the way out. Once it's in moderation, I don't think it's necessarily a source of great argument. And again, it's not about ruling out every treat and becoming really militant about it. Those extreme views will create extreme relationships, but just within reason. I mean, again, maybe asking Nana to tone down a little bit rather than no more treats in Nana's.
All about the language, isn't it? I see one there from Bernadette that I say is of particular interest to you there, Donal. Should governments ban all high sugar, fat food and drink advertising aimed towards children, including those shown on technology before Watershed? This would possibly involve taking toys out of cereals and meals, etc.
So I could read that sentence for the rest of the night and just change governments and should around. Yeah. So governments should act and legislate, not, you know, and not against all high fat, but it's the promotion to children. It's the product placement in shops. It's the buy one, get one free, bog off promotions, which are always of the treat, high fat, high salt, high sugar foods, and never on the fruit or, you know, healthy sections. So the government has a role to play. There is a plan for an obesity public health act, similar to the public health alcohol bill, which will look at all these things as a suite of measures to really effectively help parents with making the healthier choice the easier choice, and that's what society needs to do. And that is also going to address active transport to and from school and issues like that, because that physical activity side of the equation is really important. It's about energy balance, and you don't address energy balance just by looking at one side of the equation. And you know, there are some kids who do so much sport that the rules about what they should eat and drink, there aren't rules. They need to trust their hunger, trust their satiety, and you hope that their focus is a healthy diet. There was one question in there from a parent: my child loves veg but hates fruit. That's great. You know, the 7 or 5 a day that we're meant to have from that shelf on the food pyramid, the more veg and salad there is, the better. And if it's all veg and salad, that's fine.
Okay. There was a question there as well from a parent about a fussy eater. Again, the same thing. If you have a really, really fussy eater and you have somebody who just refuses to try a different food, what do you do? And I mean, I think I own one of them who just takes his heels in. I know how hard that is, so I hear that parent. But what do you do? Because I want to know.
You are patient. You don't fight over food, and you keep trying. I know it's hard. It's very hard. Now, if you do have concerns about your child not getting enough nutrients, absolutely, I would definitely recommend going to your GP, who will be able to then direct you to a registered dietitian. Absolutely. But if your child is having enough from all the food groups, I do think it's about exposure and trying again and being patient.
And I think and you can contradict me if this is wrong, but I've spoken to a lot of the psychiatrists that I've worked with who work with eating disorders, and they've had a lot of discussions. A focus on healthy eating within a family will not trigger eating disorders. The genesis of eating disorders does not come from a focus on healthy eating. Now, if that focus is obsessive, and if it's on bad foods, good foods, and weight, then that's a different thing. But a conversation in a family about how can we become a bit healthier, and we'd like to be healthier, and we'd like to eat healthier. What can we do? And involving the kids in that will not generate an eating disorder.
Yeah, 100%. Once it's not demonized and extreme, it's absolutely fine. And actually, children do pick up on those habits.
I'm afraid.
And the trick is to normalize those behaviors, so you actually don't have a lot to talk about then, because they become the norm.
I think we could talk about this all night, but I'm afraid it's time to wrap up. So I think we're going to revisit the poll again, to have a look at the poll.
Just while that's going on, I just think, Jen, there's another side. The narrative at the moment is a lot about excess of everything. If you look at unlimited binge watch, all you can eat data, all these sorts of things, we're not immune to that stuff, and it normalizes excess. And so from the point of view of, it just means we have to be more and more vigilant and on the ball, because this stuff is everywhere. And they're really unhelpful terms, and I think... Yeah,
I mean, that binge watch box sets, that whole
everything is
thing is excess.
Every single thing.
And pulling that back to enough.
40% now very confident, and 47% quite confident.
So yeah, you actually have 87 quite or very confident. That's very good.
That is very positive, isn't it? That is absolutely great. So as I said, we could have spent hours here and discussing, and I have certainly learned some useful tips. I won't be reheating the dinner for the breakfast after that. I think poll 2 may be coming up. Oh, sorry, that was poll 2. Sorry there. We hope that you're feeling more confident and empowered to start that conversation of moderation with your own children at home. And we just wanted to ask you that same question, which is what the poll was, and now that you've heard from our experts. So if you have anything new to add to the poll, please do. And it is great, absolutely great to see that people are feeling so much more confident about it now. While you're submitting your answers, I want to say a huge thank you to our panellists who were absolutely brilliant tonight. And to everybody at home for tuning in. I really appreciate it and all the questions that you sent in. Thanks also to everyone involved in the organisation and production of the webinar. And if you want to watch it back, it's been recorded and will be available on the events section of Safe Food's website in the coming days. It'll also be emailed to everybody who registered for the event.